So, the 2026 World Cup has 48 teams. Most fans assume those spots get divided based on football quality, or population, or maybe even fan base. None of those assumptions are fully correct. The real answer is a mix of history, voting power, and money. And once you see how the math actually breaks down, it stops looking neutral at all. Here's how the 48 spots are split. Europe, UEFA, gets 16 direct spots. Africa gets 9 direct spots plus 1 playoff spot. Asia gets 8 direct spots plus 1 playoff spot. North and Central America and the Caribbean, CONCACAF, gets 6 direct spots, which includes the 3 automatic host spots for the United States, Mexico, and Canada, plus 2 playoff spots. South America, CONMEBOL, gets 6 direct spots plus 1 playoff spot. Oceania, OFC, gets 1 direct spot plus 1 playoff spot, the first time in World Cup history Oceania has ever had a guaranteed slot at all. That's 46 direct spots distributed across 6 confederations, with the final 2 decided through a 6-team intercontinental playoff in March before the tournament starts. On the surface, Europe getting the most spots doesn't seem strange. Europe produces a huge number of strong teams. But the moment you compare these numbers to something other than football quality, the picture gets a lot more complicated. Here's the number nobody mentions when they talk about slot fairness. CONMEBOL, South America's confederation, has only 10 member nations total. CONMEBOL gets 6 direct spots. That means 60% of every country in South America's football confederation qualifies for the World Cup. Now compare that to CAF, Africa's confederation. It has 54 member nations. It gets 9 direct spots. That's a qualification rate of about 17%. Asia's AFC has 46 member nations and gets 8 direct spots, a rate of about 17% as well. So a South American nation has roughly 3.5 times the statistical chance of reaching a World Cup compared to an African or Asian nation, just based on how many competitors they're up against within their own confederation. That gap isn't about football quality. It's baked directly into how the confederations are structured before a single qualifying match is even played. UEFA's 16 spots make more sense when you remember UEFA has 55 member nations, the most of any confederation. But even accounting for that, Europe's slot count is shaped by something other than membership math. UEFA generates the largest share of FIFA's broadcasting and sponsorship revenue. European leagues produce most of the players that drive global interest in the sport. And UEFA holds significant voting power inside FIFA's decision-making structure. When slot allocations get debated and approved by the FIFA Council, the confederation with the most member federations, the most revenue, and historically the most World Cup success, going back to the tournament's earliest editions, tends to walk away with the largest allocation. That's not a conspiracy. It's just how an organization built on member voting and revenue contribution tends to distribute resources. CONMEBOL's situation is almost the opposite case. With only 10 nations, you might expect a small allocation. Instead, CONMEBOL has historically guarded its slots fiercely, and FIFA has consistently honored that, because South America has produced some of the most successful World Cup nations in history. Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay. A confederation with only 10 members has still produced 9 of the 22 World Cup titles ever awarded. FIFA's allocation reflects that legacy as much as it reflects current competitiveness. The result is a confederation where almost 2/3 of its members get to compete on the biggest stage in football, a rate no other confederation comes close to matching. Here's where the 2026 expansion actually tried to correct something. Going into the 2022 World Cup, the 32-team format gave Africa's only 5 spots and Asia's only 4.5. With the expansion to 48 teams, Africa's allocation rose to 9, an 80% increase, the single biggest percentage gain of any confederation. Asia's rose to 8 spots, a jump of more than 75%. FIFA's stated reasoning was straightforward. Africa and Asia represent a huge percentage of the world's population and a massive growing football market, and the previous allocation badly underrepresented both. Asia alone has more people than every other confederation combined. 46 AFC member nations were competing for what used to be only 4.5 spots. But even after this correction, the math still isn't proportional. Asia's population dwarfs Europe's. Asia's slot count does not. CONCACAF's 6 direct spots look reasonable until you notice that 3 of those spots, half the total, are automatic host slots. The United States, Mexico, and Canada didn't qualify through competition. They received automatic entry because they're hosting the tournament. That leaves only 3 spots actually contested through CONCACAF qualifying for the Confederation's other 32 member nations, plus 2 playoff spots. The headline number, 6 spots, makes CONCACAF look like it received a major increase from the 3.5 it had in 2022. In practice, the competitive slot count for non-host nations barely moved. Oceania's situation is the clearest example of how slow and political this system actually is. For every World Cup since at least 1998, Oceania received only a half slot, meaning its best team had to win an intercontinental playoff just to qualify every single time. Decades of a region effectively locked out of guaranteed participation, despite producing competitive football. Part of the reason Oceania has historically struggled for representation traces back to 2006, when Australia, by far the Confederation's strongest team, left OFC entirely and joined the AFC, seeking tougher competition and a higher qualification rate. That left Oceania's remaining nations, primarily New Zealand, fighting for a single playoff spot against the rest of the world. It took until 2026, after years of lobbying by OFC officials, for FIFA to finally grant Oceania one guaranteed direct slot, the first unconditional spot the Confederation has ever received in World Cup history. If World Cup slots were distributed purely by population, Asia and Africa would dominate the allocation table, since together they represent the overwhelming majority of the planet's population. If slots were distributed purely by footballing strength, South America's small but historically dominant confederation would likely receive a much larger relative share, and some of Europe's weaker federations would probably lose ground. Instead, what actually determines the number is a combination of historical precedent, confederation voting power inside FIFA, revenue contribution, and political negotiation that happens once every cycle when the FIFA Council approves a new slot table. The 2026 expansion did genuinely correct some of the worst imbalances, particularly for Africa, Asia, and Oceania. But it didn't create a system based on a single clean principle like population or quality. It created a system that's still, fundamentally, the result of negotiation between 6 confederations with very different amounts of leverage. The next time you watch the World Cup draw and notice that a continent with billions of people has fewer total teams than a continent with a fraction of that population, that's not an oversight. That's the system working exactly the way it was built to work.